G'day guys, Alex from Axe Physio here. Today we're talking about ACL injuries, and specifically we're looking at the lateral hip muscles or the lateral sling. Now, this muscle group or this area is really important to help prevent ACL injuries. It's really underlooked by a lot of different rehabs, and people tend to miss out on what is a crucial part of the rehab process. Why is it really important? Because, well, when we change direction and land, the knee is more of a hinge joint, so it's only going to bend and extend, but the hip's going to control where the knee goes. So if you don't have really good lateral hip strength, you're going to be putting yourself more into that risky position for an ACL tear. So we're going to address this lateral hip or lateral sling rehab for the ACL in 3 parts. Number 1 is going to be strength. Simply exercises that you can do to implement at multiple stages in the rehab process. Doesn't matter if you're early in your ACL rehab or towards the back end. Doesn't matter if you're trying to prevent an old ACL injury that you've already rehabbed. Number 2, we're going to be looking at control exercises. So jumping, landing, how do we know whether we've got a nice strong lateral sling or lateral hip muscles? And sort of drills that you can integrate at different parts of the rehab process. And then 3, we're looking at end stage sort of field exercises that really biases that lateral sling and those lateral hip muscles.
So what does a strong lateral sling actually look like? Well, when you jump up and down, you'll be able to control the landing. Your hips will be in a fairly neutral position and your knee won't twist inwards, putting you at risk of that ACL injury. You'll also be able to move laterally with good hip and knee control, preventing that inwards position of the knee. If you've got poor hip strength, you might overcompensate with your trunk or just lose the position entirely due to poor hip strength. So with the strength exercises, let's start with easy and work our way up to more challenging. So the half star plank is a great way to work the top side of the hip in the video here. This is strengthening those outside hip muscles by pushing against the band. It's definitely a lot more challenging than it looks. Unlike the leg raise, the side plank actually works the entire trunk as well as the hip. This is a great strength exercise to work on that control. We can then turn it into a full star plank where we use the top side of the hip as well. Therefore, you're using both the top and bottom lateral hip muscles. Really great and challenging exercise to do. Now the key here is to continually make these exercises harder, so we can then turn into a banded star plank. But we just don't stop there. We would then go, 1 band, 2 band, 3 band, 4 bands if we need to. If this is the only exercise that you're able to do at a certain part of your rehab, keep making it harder. Do the side plank for longer. Keep progressing yourself. So the crab walk is a standing variation of strengthening the lateral sling. Same situation here, 1 band, 2 band, 3 band, or just increase the band resistance. The monster walk is a similar exercise to the crab walk. All these variations work the lateral sling. They're in the same category of exercises that work that outside of the hip. So we want to make sure that we continue to make these exercises harder and more challenging. Finally, the side sled is my favorite exercise to strengthen up the lateral hip. It's like the squat of the lateral hip. It's the deadlift. What this allows you to do is very systematically and objectively increase the amount of resistance that you are doing. When doing this exercise, make sure that the leg closest to the sled is the one doing the work. It's pushing against the sled, it's strengthening up that outside of the hip, and as it gets easy, you just add more weight. So it's a really easy way to continually progress yourself and make the exercise harder, which is the key. So now to move on to phase 2, which is hip control. Now the function of the lateral hip or those outside hip muscles is to maintain our hips in neutral when we're standing on one leg. So early on in the rehab process, getting good at just working that hip hike is a great functional exercise to do. So dropping down and being relaxed and then engaging the hip on the side that's on the ground. So the leg that's on the ground is the hip that's working, not the leg that's off the ground. So it's my left leg in this situation, hike, contract, and then relax. If you find it too hard to do it without balance, please by all means use something to assist yourself. It's not a balance exercise, it is a strengthening and control exercise of that hip, engaging and bringing that hip to neutral. Just remember, it is the leg that is on the ground that is working hard in this situation. So having your hand on your hip, you'll feel those hip muscles engaging to bring yourself into neutral. So make sure that even if you're late stage rehab, you've got a really good ability to control your hips doing that exercise. Next we have lateral jump with 2 legs. Putting a marker on the ground, nothing that you're going to trip over, just pushing side to side, jumping and landing. Now, generally this will be more reserved for people that have now gotten back to the hopping and landing phases that generally would occur before you go back to run. If you aren't quite back to running yet, please check out my ACL running preparation video that'll show you great exercises to do to get you back to running. I'll link that in the description. Initially, just use the double leg hop to focus on the side to side movement. This isn't necessarily going to be strengthening the outside of the hip, but it's a great way to practice the movement. So once you've got the ability to jump forwards confidently and we can do the side to side confidently, we can now move on to doing the single leg lateral jumps. Make sure that we don't fall into the trap of overcompensating with our trunk like there, but instead we are using our lateral hip muscles and our quad to land in that nice bent position where we're slightly bent at the hips and at the knees, and we're landing confidently and not compensating with bad habits. Once you've developed the side to side pattern, both as a double leg and a single leg, we can then make it a little bit more challenging and then work on some ladder work and some obstacle work. The reason for this is in a game of sport, basketball, soccer, football, what have you, on the field, you're going to see lots of different things. So training your body to adapt to different patterns and different types of movement is going to be really important. If we telegraph everything in physio or in the gym, you're not going to be able to adapt to the game-like situation. So although we're still in the number 2, the control section, we want to start changing things up. So doing some ladder drills like this is a great way to move a little bit differently than just plain jumping. Start slow, speed up, get some different coordination drills happening. So we're now doing single, double, single, whereas before we were doing double, double, double. So single, going on to 2 and then single. It's a nice way just to sort of change up the coordination with the leg and then moving lateral to multiple jumps in a row as well. Just make sure that when you're doing this, you're always hard on your technique and you're making sure that you come to a complete stop when you pause. So there's no falling, you fight for that control and that nice landing position. We can then work on syncing these together, so going straight into a single, double, single and repeat, but I'm still pausing at the end. I'm making sure that I've got control before I explode off. Once you get good practice, speed it up and it becomes not only control but a bit of endurance as well. From there, I encourage my patients to think about syncing multiple lateral jumps in a row and then working on increasing the distance of each one. We're just trying to move laterally, use our lateral sling muscles, use our knee and our foot to develop good landing patterns and techniques when moving side to side. This is a great exercise for that. The next progression is to increase the distance that you're jumping. So add 2 markers that you're not going to trip over and then work on increasing that distance. However, make sure that you control the distance that you're jumping. If you're falling over and you can't land and control, even if you're having to hop to adjust, it's too far. So make sure that you can achieve the distance, make sure you can control the landing. It's a great way to strengthen up the hip from a landing, but also from a production, a force production in terms of being able to make the distance. You can then try to sync the hops together to once again work on that capacity. Now, a great test that I like to perform with my patient is the single leg lateral hop endurance test. I know it's a mouthful, but what we do is we set up 2 lines 40 centimeters apart and we try to jump over that line as many times as we can in 30 seconds. This is going to spit out a score and then we try to compare that to the other side, and hopefully you're 95% similar on both sides, and that I like to think you should be able to get over 30. So set yourself up with a camera and a loud timer that tells you when to stop. If you touch the line, that is a no rep, but you just keep going for the 30 seconds. Even if you tumble or fall, you just get back up and keep going, and we just count the results when we go through the film. That'll spit out your score. This is a great way to know what your capacity for jumping side to side is. This is like an endurance measure, but it also tells you how your knee control is going when you look back through the film. Alright guys, up next we're going into our field-based drills, part 3. So part 3 of this section, people have generally been doing a lot of straight line running. They're getting towards the end of their rehab, and we're trying to introduce change of direction to promote efficient use of that lateral sling. We want to make sure that our knee is not buckling in. We've got really good strong hip position like we spoke about earlier in the video, so we're not collapsing through the hip or collapsing through the trunk to balance ourselves out when we do things like cutting and changing direction. So different drills here that we can use focus on cutting in easy directions and then syncing cuts together. So let's start at the beginning. A great cutting exercise to begin with is a Y, like the letter Y. You start at the base, jog forward, and then at the beginning premeditating which way you're going to go so it's not a surprise. And then towards the back end of the rehab, it can be where someone tells you left or right or holds out a hand and you've got to react to that. So you've got to change maybe mid-run to adjust your position. What we want to make sure is that we're not collapsing through that knee or overcompensating through our trunk when changing direction. We want to make sure that we're keeping fairly nice alignment. Now, alignment doesn't mean being like a robot, it just means you're controlling the position. So in a lot of sports like basketball or soccer or rugby, you have to jockey or do a drop step. So this is a drop step. So you drop, change direction. So the focus is on the leg that's pivoting. So we pivot and then we change direction. So this is just a defensive move that you'll have to do in many different sports, and it's very lateral. So incorporating different moves into your lateral training or control training is really important when getting back on the field. The 4 square is a great combination of just about most movements you would do on a field. In this situation, someone is telling you where to go. So back cone, you change direction, and you just pick the movement strategy which is going to work best for you at the time. So if you get told to come forward, you then might get told to turn and go to the back. So you've got to turn and go. And that's changing direction. You want to film these sort of exercises so that you can go back through the footage at the end. So essentially you need to think about what do I need to do in my sport, and then pick a few exercises that replicate the different facets of your sport. Execute them well, make sure that you film yourself so that you can watch what your knees and hips are doing and feel confident when you're executing the exercises. Start with a slower speed in general and then work up to game pace.
So guys, 3 take-home messages. Get the lateral hip strong, make sure you do some control exercises where it's just side to side, and then turn it into the sort of field environment, more game scenario. If you know that you do a certain move on the court, maybe it's a crossover or something in basketball, maybe it's sort of a different move in soccer, practice that. Make sure you break that move down and you practice the lateral components of that. Guys, I'd really like you to share this video with someone that needs it. I feel like this information isn't really circulated all that well. And I've got lots of other ACL content as well, which will be linked below. I really appreciate your time in watching this video. If you have any questions or you'd like an individual rehab program, check out my website, axphysio.com. Thanks guys.